Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. I'm Perryn Keys. I'm joined today, as usual, by Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter, and by Scott Rabalais, who's going to hustle out of here as fast as he can to finish off his Christmas shopping. There are very few days to go, Rab.
It's the absolute truth. That's exactly what I'm doing when I leave.
I might be there with you.
It sounds like we're all in the same boat.
Great.
That's
what happens when you're covering sports all the time. There's games and practices and everything.
Well, and naturally, we are sort of people who are motivated by deadlines. We have to meet daily deadlines, so we're not as good as at long-term deadlines. So here we are. We're up against it. It is Thursday afternoon, obviously just a few short days before we reach Christmas. Merry Christmas to all of you who celebrate out there. And a programming note, actually, we will be off Monday. We are usually here Monday and Thursdays on all our social channels, on YouTube, specifically our LSU Tigers on NOLA.com YouTube channel. We are typically there live on Monday and Thursday. We will not be here on Monday, obviously, because of the holiday. We will be back a week from today, a week from Thursday, in advance of LSU's bowl game against Wisconsin on January 1st down in Tampa. You can catch us on all these on all our social channels and our YouTube channel, specifically LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Subscribe there. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us anytime later on. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever other finer podcasts are found. And of course, subscribe to The Advocate. Subscribe to the print edition, the digital edition. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Please subscribe. And subscribe to our LSU newsletter. It's a daily newsletter, but Rab handles that 3 times a week. You can stay up to date with all the latest headlines: LSU recruiting, LSU football, LSU baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball, softball, gymnastics, all of it as we go throughout next year. To sign up for the LSU newsletter, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And as always, we are brought to you every Monday and Thursday by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL, financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. Contact Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today. So, gentlemen, it is Thursday. It is the day after the early signing period has kicked off. LSU brings in 27 signees, 3 transfers that we know about. They rank number 11 at the moment, according to 24/7 Sports Composite rankings. And we'll just start there. Wilson, your early thoughts on this class as it stands.
As it stands currently, it addresses some needs in the secondary. It continues to stock up the offensive line. I think that's probably the most positive main takeaway. The thing that you would feel the best about in this signing class is that LSU has signed 5 offensive linemen. There's a chance it gets a 6th on Friday in Cohen Eccles. In fact, it seems like it's very likely going to get a 6th on Friday in Cohen Eccles. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just Brad Davis continuing to stock up on the offensive line. We heard it from the very beginning of Brian Kelly's tenure that he wanted LSU to get a lot better on the offensive line, and they have certainly done that. That's a strength of this team right now, and it's only getting stronger, bringing in the kind of guys that they're bringing in. And they don't even need to play right away because LSU, Charles Turner is moving on. It seems like he accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl. But other than that, could bring back everybody else in the offensive line. And so that's just getting stronger and stronger with this recruiting class. And then they brought in a lot of bodies in the defensive backfield in the secondary, try to start to patch up those deficiencies there and really build long term. We'll see kind of how those players begin to pan out into next season. But those are probably the 2 main takeaways. And the third being that they're just not done yet. I don't think we're going to have a full, maybe be able to make a full take or referendum on this class, in particular until in February, once Dominick, McKinley, and Terry Bussey really finalize what they're doing.
Rab, you've covered every signing day at LSU since 1893. You've obviously seen it all. You've seen number 1 classes and everywhere in between probably 1 and 50 or close to it. You've seen it all. You know that not always is the superstar the superstar that we thought was going to emerge from a signing class. And then sometimes sometimes the superstars are absolutely superstars. Anyway, long story short, speaking of stars, there was a young man named Jawan Johnson from Lafayette Christian who signed on Wednesday, as expected. decommitted from Colorado quite a while ago and has stayed with the Tigers ever since then. And Brian Kelly had more than a little bit to say about him. Anything you want to add about Juwan Johnson and just sort of the secondary in general moving forward?
Yeah, I love all these references to my age. Yeah, we used to wait around the telegraph office for the signees to come in.
And for those who aren't watching on YouTube, Rab actually isn't that old.
No,
yes,
he's just older than we are, so I have to rib him over.
No, that's okay. No, I don't mind. I don't mind. Wilson's young enough to be my son, but aside from that, Juwan Johnson. Brian Kelly just gushed about him, about his ability. He said you watch him play one position, and they've recruited him as a cornerback.
But, that is his position on the college level, but he played quarterback in high school.
Yeah, so he said you watch him play this, and you say, oh, that's great. And then you watch him play that, and you say, wow, he could do that. And then you watch him play another thing, you could do another thing. So just a well-rounded athlete and a Louisiana athlete. And I think that's the big takeaway to me of this class. As Kelly said, either a total of the 20 signees either from Louisiana or they had significant ties to Louisiana, were born here, moved away, as we've seen with another number of recruits over the years. But they got very much Louisiana centric after that being kind of like it seemed like they were doing the opposite previously. In the first two recruiting classes under Kelly. So that was an interesting one. But they, as Wilson said, they addressed a lot of needs. Is it a flashy class? Not necessarily. 11 and 24/7, number 10 according to On3. A good, respectable class, fills a lot of needs. They had someone in every position group, even signed a kicker. Someone in every single position group that you address. You need a quarterback, got to get a quarterback. Got a running back, got tight ends, got wide receivers, got defensive backs, offensive linemen, as Wilson said, defensive linemen. And, with three transfers, a safety, a wide receiver, and a quarterback coming in as well. And they're not done. People might be wondering, I think, hey, they're 27. I thought you had to stop. They can sign as many as they want. Right. As long as you're at 85 for the start of the season, you're fine. So we'll see how many more LSU gets. I wouldn't think too many more players in February, would you, Wilson? I mean, obviously they have those two real big targets.
And that's really it. I mean, those would be the only other two high school recruits unless somebody emerges late onto their board, but it doesn't seem that way. And it's probably so just those two, Bussey and McKinley, who would be either one and or, would be the only 5 stars in this class. That's the thing. Like you said, it's not flashy. There's no 5 stars in this class right now. They have a whole bunch of 4-star guys. They have some 3 stars in there too. And that's probably the one thing where you look at it and you think sort of like, is that LSU doesn't have a 5-star yet. You're used to signing those as LSU. But maybe if they can cap it off with, McKinley, Bussey, either McKinley, Bussey, or both of them, potentially, then that would be like a really, really strong finish to the class and give you some of that flash that you didn't necessarily see on Wednesday, especially because it was such a drama-free day. I was talking to Shay Dixon, who so closely covers recruiting for On3, and he's been doing that for a long time over there with LSU, and he's like, I can't remember a signing day like this where it was just so
no drama.
Calm.
Yeah, they had 27 commitments coming in. They signed 27 guys early in the day, too. It wasn't like anything dragged on or somebody dragging on to today or Friday, which is the end of the period. And apparently, also according to Shay, they didn't have anyone take visits once they got into the contact period. No one took a visit anywhere else. So these guys were locked in commitments, and that's also unusual. So. That speaks to LSU's staff staying on top of these guys and staying in touch with them. And sometimes, recruits kind of float away and said, I haven't heard from this school in X number of weeks or something like that. And I would say that no one can really say that about this class. So a good solid effort, the kind of class that you need to keep building the roster and, moving forward to what you would think is an even, better recruiting opportunity next recruiting cycle.
Well, I don't know if Perryn, you were going to mention this or get us to this anyway, but you mentioned roster and kind of where LSU's roster is at now, and that was sort of the big picture thing I think from Kelly yesterday. Was he in his mind is they think that this roster is closer to where they want it to be now 3 cycles in. They've signed 65 freshmen over the last 3 years. Obviously, like you said, that's an 85-man scholarship limit on your team. And while 8 of those have later transferred out, the majority of this team has now come through the high school ranks. And that's something that Kelly has always said that he wanted this program to be built on freshmen, and that LSU is now starting to get there. And that's part of the reason you aren't seeing them sign as many transfers yet. And I think maybe we could probably touch on cornerback in particular. In a little bit in defensive tackle as well, two areas of need that they haven't really addressed through the portal at this point. It's not for lack of trying, as we've talked about on this podcast before and in our writing, that they've been looking at corners in particular and evaluating them. Had some on campus last week. To Kamarion Richardson at Mississippi State in particular, but he went to Ole Miss instead. But Kelly feels a lot more confident in that cornerback room. But to kind of before we get into all that, to go back, this roster is starting to get to a place where he sort of envisioned it going toward, and so I think that you're going to start to really be able to say, like, okay, well, now that it's getting there, all right, well, now what are these results going to be? If it's getting closer to what you want, then what's it going to look like on the field? Because it's got to get better, particularly on the defensive side.
Well, speaking of the defensive side and speaking of the transfer portal, I was going to say LSU made a noteworthy addition, but it's really a noteworthy retention in the transfer portal with Sage Ryan. Took his name out and added it back in, and just as you say, that sort of bolsters the cornerback position in the secondary. If you just want to go through that a little bit about who they've got coming back, because now all of a sudden you do have, regardless of what you may or may not think in terms of assessments and their ability to get better, you do have a deep group of corners now.
You do now. I mean, like, you look at it next year, LSU is going to have at least 10 cornerbacks in that room. We saw actually at practice today, J.K. Johnson, the Ohio State transfer who suffered the lower leg fracture in preseason camp. He was in pads. He was out on like an opposite field just with an athletic trainer, but it was a positive sign in his recovery. So they expect to have him available next season coming off of that injury. And then, Brian Kelly named Javian Toviano, Sage Ryan, Ashton Sams, Jeremiah Hughes. Those are all guys coming back, as well as Zy Alexander. Now, Zy we don't know his recovery timeline, and LSU or Kelly has been very vague about what he suffered. We know it to be a lower leg injury. I saw him on Monday using a crutch, had a brace on his left leg. But Kelly has not said one way or another what type of injury he had, which is a little bit different for Kelly. Usually he's pretty just transparent about, especially if it's something, long-term, what somebody has. And so, we'll see exactly what Zy Alexander's recovery timeline is, but that's a starter who will be back, at least with the team. And then now they've signed here Juwan Johnson, who we already mentioned, PJ Woodland, Bernard Causey, and Wallace Foster, to give this room, as Brian Kelly said, and he's right in this regard, certainly, the depth. I mean, they've got bodies now at corner that they didn't have over the last couple of years, that are now coming through the program and staying with the program, instead of signing 3 transfer corners in the first year that they came in, and amongst many other defensive backs, and then 4 transfer corners last year. And I think that's really what he meant in his answer when I asked him about the corners yesterday. He was saying like that's why you haven't seen us jump into the portal. And I think really what he meant is like jump into the portal for the sheer numbers.
Right.
Like they could still go and sign 1, maybe even 2 transfer cornerbacks, but you're not going to see them sign 4 guys who all need to come in and probably start and play immediately right away. They've got a little bit more depth and competition and development going on there in the room because of what they've done in the high school ranks. But I've seen some debate about this, so I'm curious, Rab, what you think. Is that the right approach for what this cornerback room needs right now after what we saw this season?
For me, I'd make go and get a couple more experienced cornerbacks a priority. Obviously, you're building up the numbers, and that's good, but you got a lot of inexperienced guys. Use the right term there. And, it's going to take some time. You don't really want to throw some of these guys in there in action as freshmen like you had to this year, with all the injuries and disciplinary situations and that sort of thing. So, I was a little surprised. I think you were too, that he said yesterday that they seemed like they were pretty done at the cornerback position. But that's his approach, and we'll see who's coaching the cornerbacks next year, obviously. But I'd like to see a little more experience there, that you could go find someone in the portal still, and there's still time. Maybe they're playing things close to the vest. Maybe that's what they're going to do.
And wouldn't it not surprise you two gentlemen to see, let's say they get Eccles, let's say they get McKinley and Bussey, as sort of these late, 3 late signings. Even if they have that, I haven't run the numbers, but it would not surprise me if they didn't have 1 or 2 scholarship spots open for just that reason. Something shakes out in spring practice. Somebody elsewhere at some other Power 5 program or wherever decides they want to hit the road, and all of a sudden now, again, back to your point, Wilson, you're not recruiting 14 guys out of the transfer portal, but you're going to be very, very selective and find, okay, we need this one spot right here. We need that one spot right there. And you keep those couple of spots open just for those types of things.
And
that's
long term, I'm sorry, long term, you have to go this way. You have to build up with young players and develop them. You know, they had to get off this merry-go-round, especially in the secondary, because we saw the players they brought in the first year, right, with Mekhi Garner and Converse and Jacques Bernard Converse and those guys, and then they're gone, and then you got to start all over again. You can't keep doing that.
It's almost like a latter-day version of the JC, like Jackie Sherrill at Mississippi State. He had such success signing a bunch of junior college players, but you have to keep doing that over and over and over
hit
again.
on it every single year. And LSU didn't really hit on it this year. Like, I mean, Deuce Chestnut and Denver Harris, two guys I didn't mention a minute ago I didn't mention for a reason. Like they might not be back with the team.
Right.
And then that's 2 of the 4 that you signed. And so, they haven't been out of practice. And Kelly, when asked about the cornerback room, he listed off a whole bunch of guys, and he did not mention either of them, which is not a surprise, telling. Really. Right. Yeah, and it is telling, though, like you said. And to Rab's point about whether or not this is like kind of the right approach and all of that is to be kind of clear about their transfer portal like philosophy, as it were, is. They're not going to just go away from the portal completely.
Right.
You can't in modern college football, and they're not going to. We've already seen them sign 3.
Finish it off.
Yeah, we've seen them get 3 commitments here. They just don't want that to be the foundation of the program.
Right.
And that's kind of, to wrap this up, like what Kelly, I think, meant yesterday was that the foundation of the roster, the major core of it, is now guys that they have signed from high school, and they can then begin to get very targeted guys at certain positions. And so now you can start to see, like, okay, LSU's rosters at this point where they've been trying to get it to in that regard. Now they need to make sure that these are they've already needed to, but now we need to see, like, okay, they've done that. Are these players going to now pan out? Have they brought in the right ones in order to be able to win football games and develop them? Because then that gets into a whole other sort of discussion down the road. But at this point, they had the roster in terms of its makeup in a place that's more close to what he wanted it to be.
And I think they've done this on the offensive line, right? And this is maybe one reason that the offensive line is a strength, and they've just built on it more. Like you said, with 5 or 6 more signees this year, they have the luxury of bringing those guys along slowly, because you have most of your starters coming back last year. And next year it was a bit of a roll of the dice, having to start true freshmen with Will Campbell and Emory Jones, but now it's paying off big dividends for LSU.
This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. And please subscribe to The Advocate if you have not already. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Sign up for our newsletter as well. Again, that's a daily newsletter, but Rab handles that 3 times a week. You get all the latest headlines to your desktop, to your phone, to your inbox. To do that, you sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We're here every Monday and Thursday live on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. We will not be here we will not be here on Monday, obviously. We all love each other, but not as much as we enjoy Christmas. And
come on, tell them we're going to be at your house watching A Christmas Story over and over again. That's what we're going to be doing.
You'll be at my house watching Bad Santa, because I'm just like that. We're typically here on Mondays and Thursdays. We'll not be here on Monday because of the holiday, obviously. We'll be back on Thursday. We're live here, as I said, on the YouTube channel, specifically LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you don't catch us there, you can always catch us after the fact on that same channel. And we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other fun podcasts are found. And one thing I didn't mention at the top of the show, probably not going to get there in time for Christmas, but order the LSU fan in your life. Order some championship posters. These things are iconic. They've been around. The baseball ones obviously have been around since 1991, and LSU has done a whole lot of winning since then. So we have plenty of posters to sell, plenty of Advocate front pages to sell, and that includes obviously the Jaden Daniels Heisman Trophy win. If you go to store.theadvocate.com, again, that's store.theadvocate.com, and enter the code INSIDER, you get 15% off your purchase. And again, as always, every Monday and Thursday, we are brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more, go to Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today.
I was going to throw in one quick thing about the posters.
Please.
You know, when Joe Burrow won the Heisman and he put out his poster, they recreated the page from when Billy Cannon won in 1959 because no one in 59 thought to keep the plates.
Sure.
That we had. So they recreated it, and now you could have all three Heisman winners.
They're all for like a good salesman, Rab. Well done.
Yeah,
they're all there. It's stored at the
thing. Company man.
No, it's a cool thing, and it looks really good.
Speaking of things that look really good, Trey'Dez Green.
Yeah.
Trey'Dez Green and Deshaun McBride are sort of the two highest rated recruits in this class. We did not touch on them yet. They are. We're going to make some assumptions already, some presumptions, but we believe that they have a really, really good shot of making an impact early on in their career at LSU. Wilson, if you just want to give us the Reader's Digest version on Trey'Dez Green and Deshaun McBride and what they bring to the table.
It was fun talking to some high school coaches this week about Trey'Dez Green, the high school coaches who had to try to game plan for him this year because it was not fun for them. One coach asked, like, what was going through your mind when you were watching film of Zachary and seeing what they did with him? Because he played wide receiver, really at Zachary this year.
Wow.
And yeah,
6'7",
that's how they used him.
226. Good luck.
Exactly. He goes, a lot of prayers. And this is actually, so what defenses ended up having to do quite a bit against him this year was, have somebody on the line basically try to press or slow down his momentum in some way and then bracket him. But that ended up causing problems on the other side of the field because Zachary had a lot of good players and usually ended up, causing other issues at some point in the game. And of course, Zachary ended up winning a state title, lost to Ruston, but Trey'Dez was just a weapon on the outside, a mismatch on the outside all year. And it's going to be fascinating to see how LSU uses him because, like we said, he was basically playing out at receiver. LSU listed him as a tight end. That is going to be his position in college. He's 6'7" now, like you said. But how are they going to utilize somebody who can run like him and jump like him? And because, the coaches who I talked to were impressed by his physicality, but he didn't have to do much in the way of inline blocking this year. That's something else he's going to have to kind of develop him on, most likely. But Brian Kelly said that he was incredibly impressed by the jump that Trey'Dez made from his junior year at East Feliciana to now his senior year at Zachary, because he's a guy who, with a basketball background, and Kelly said for somebody who'd been playing basketball a long while and kind of relatively new to football, to see the progress that he has made in a year, he was really struck by that. And so he looks like somebody who's going to continue to develop and get better and give LSU an offensive weapon there on the outside. It'll be fascinating to see how they try to deploy him over the course of his career. When it comes to McBride, this guy's long, really, in particular. What is it, his measurables again? For me, I know you got it right there. You got
McBride, 6'3", 192.
Yeah.
And he had to work to get to 192.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see kind of, he's probably going to have to put on some more weight for starters. But because of what LSU looks like in that secondary and that's at that safety position, he will have a chance to get on the field, at least maybe push himself into the two deep. LSU brought in Jordan Gilbert to be a starter out of Texas A&M. We'll see what happens with Major Burns. If Major Burns comes back, then those are probably your two starters at safety. But maybe Deshaun can push himself into the two deep around, some of these returning players like Kylan Jackson, who didn't play a lot this year because he was injured. Ryan Yates, who played a lot, but was maybe more of a coverage guy. And so we'll just kind of have to see how it plays out. But it does, LSU starting to kind of restock some numbers there at safety. And Deshaun is, because of with how highly he's ranked and what he did this year at Denham Springs over the last couple of years too, it's going to be somebody who might be able to get on the field early, but we'll kind of see how it pans out.
So the question then becomes, well, one of the questions, I guess I should say, we're tackling a lot of them right now, but the question, and we touched on this a little bit, you guys touched on this beforehand, just sort of surveying the class, the LSU class. 5 SEC teams are ahead of LSU in their recruiting rankings right now. So it begs the question, Rab, I'll put it to you, has LSU done enough?
You could always do a little more in recruiting. It's like how much money is enough? A little more.
Right.
You can always use, and like when you're looking up there and Georgia's number 1 and Alabama's number 2, and you have the schools. Auburn, their first full cycle under Hugh Freeze, they're ranked ahead of you. And you got Oklahoma and Texas; they're both up
Texas
there. They're schools 5. That are coming in. That's the school. And Perryn says that we're counting those schools coming in because that's who you're going to be playing starting in 24. but still, like I said, it's a class that maybe lacks some flash. You don't have a an Arch Manning, obviously who wasn't coming here, but he went to Texas, and that was a big flash in their class last year, right? You don't have anybody like that, but it's the kind of class that it keeps you in the hunt, and it helps to get. 5 stars hit more than 4 stars, and 4 stars hit more than 3 stars. That's all true, but it's also about developing the players and having depth and creating a situation. You can win a lot of games with the players and continue to compete with the players. In my opinion, that LSU recruited and where they are in the recruiting rankings. This LSU's. I went back and looked using On3's rankings. Wilson used 24/7. It's all subjective, and
the best is when you have the composite. It kind of brings in every major.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're composite rankings, and you use the 24/7 composite rankings, and LSU's been in the top 10 9 of the last 10 years. That's pretty good, but you don't have to be. Michigan is 17th this year. They're the number 1 seed, undefeated in the college football playoff. They were 18th last year. Washington, the other undefeated team, had a class that was ranked 80th within the last 5 years. 80th. So but they got a great transfer in Michael Penix, and they're off to the races. And they're going to win the national championship. I don't know, but they're playing for it. So you can. And you can say, well, that's the Pac. They're in the Pac-12, and that's not the SEC. I understand, but they won the games that they had to win, and they're in the position that only one other SEC team is in. So, I think it's the kind of class that helps get you there. Yeah, you gotta have some big splashy recruits, and we've talked before on this podcast and in print on our website about Bryce Underwood, the highly regarded quarterback, the number 1 player for the class of 25 out of Michigan, who LSU is hot for, and right now a lot of people say LSU is the favorite for. So you got to eventually land some of those guys, but I think this class puts LSU in a good spot to continue to be a contending program. To be what we said on the last podcast, the standard going forward. You're in the playoff, you had a successful season. If you're not, it wasn't a successful season. And that's where they are right now.
And it's also one of those things where we're not going to be able to make a full judgment on it for probably about 2 years, maybe 3.
Right.
If we look up in 2 years and LSU is, because early this class will form the core of the team and, 3 seasons from now, basically, when they're juniors, before they start to get draft eligible and that kind of thing. And if in 3 years we're looking up and LSU is backslid, then we'll be able to point back to, they didn't recruit very well. Their recruiting sort of slipped, and then that would be a big reason why. But if they're continuing to play, if they have successful seasons start to turn into like consistent championship contenders, then it'll be like, okay, well then they did some really good evaluations of 3 and 4 stars and developed them. And so we just won't be able to really, it's something to keep an eye on, certainly, but it won't be something that you really know the answer to until they get out on the field and we see it kind of happen over the course of the next couple of years. I think it is, as you've mentioned, maybe a little bit of cause for concern that this class doesn't have a 5-star and that it's ranked number 11 right now. But that's the other thing too, like we said, is that full judgment won't be able to be made really completely until they actually, a couple years from now, but also in February, when if they can land at least McKinley, or one of those two with McKinley or Bussey, then that you start to get that flash and you put yourself in a better position, especially because you need defensive linemen.
As it relates specifically to next year's LSU team, though, I think it's important to note that apparently the LSU coaching staff has done a good job re-recruiting the players it has. If I'm not mistaken, 8 transfers, is that right? 8 players in the transfer portal?
Oh, who have entered? Oh, well, no, it was 9 entries. They've lost 9 players to the portal.
9 players, and none of them, assuming that Sage Ryan does stay and he's coming back, that's no starters, correct? No starters.
No starters, no.
Yeah. So there's that, and plus also, obviously LSU is in bowl practice, and you guys got to see some of bowl practice today, and there have been some notable players on defense who, presuming that you're seeing them out there, it would stand to reason that they're going to come back. Some of those players, if you just want to go through the handful of guys who look like they will probably be on the team next year.
Yeah, we know for sure Greg Penn will be. He said today. He goes, as of now, I'm coming back. I said, as of now, so it's still a decision. He's like, nah, I'm coming back. And so it would be surprised if he could change his mind, I guess. But he's somebody who's draft eligible, but it looks like he won't be doing that. And that's somebody who is at least some consistency right there in the middle of the defense. A guy who started 25 games over the last 2 years and played pretty solid. I think he played probably got better this year than he was last year, and we'll see kind of how he continues to progress. He had a little edge to his voice as he was talking, because he obviously, I mean, you'd be surprised if you didn't feel this way, was kind of really what's the right way to say this, upset about how LSU played defensively, and wants to be part of the solution.
He personally came on though this year. I think
he played. I think he was more consistent than he was last season, but made a few more plays than he did last season. And he was also somebody who, right at the start of the year there, he didn't even start the season opener against Florida State. And then when LSU moved Harold Perkins, he came into the lineup and sort of stabilized some things there in the defense. Even though it was, you can say, well, what do you mean he stabilized? Their defense was terrible. It's like, well, he provided something there in the middle that was a little bit more reliable, especially as Omar Speights was in and out of the lineup and then not playing well at times, and Harold's position was so in flux. You at least knew that Greg Penn was going to be there in the middle of the defense and able to make the calls. He's a vocal guy. He's one of those guys you look at next year maybe as a potential team captain kind of thing on the defensive side. And so we know he's coming back. We don't yet know if Mekhi Wingo's coming back. He said today, he was asked about it today, he said he hasn't decided. He's just right now kind of getting healthy again after undergoing surgery. It was pretty gruesome. He's like,
it wasn't that bad, but we're all kind of.
He's talking about like muscles pulling away from his pelvis, and like he had to have
he had a core muscle surgery.
Yeah,
because he had an abductor. I think
that was part of it. A few sounded like a couple different things had to get repaired.
So midway through the season, he'd been having these problems, and it just got worse in the Missouri game. Ironically, his former team, and he had to have this surgery. And we're all kind of squirming a little bit describing it. He said, "Oh, it wasn't really that bad." And he was feeling full go. He like Wilson observed at practice today, he was in full contact. And
he said he's at about 90% right now. He only just kind of really got back into it last week, but he doesn't have a non-contact jersey on or anything. And
he had a great quote. Someone asked him, how important it was for him to come back for the bowl game. Said maybe he won't come back next year. He could certainly sit out the bowl game if that was the case. He said, "I'm a captain. I felt I owed it to these guys to try to help them get this 10th win." And that's what you want to hear. If you're an LSU fan, that's the kind of quote you want to hear. That's the kind of guy you want to support, Mekhi Wingo. So,
and he's been nothing if not dependable when he's been out there.
He has.
Long held story about how he played more snaps than any other defensive tackle in the country in 2022.
And to build off of just the discussion with Wingo and talking about this defense, what it's bringing back, specifically on the defensive line, we don't yet know exactly who's coming back on the defensive line, but there's been indications that there's going to be a major chunk of them coming back. Brian Kelly was asked yesterday about defensive tackle specifically, and sort of if the reason they hadn't signed a defensive tackle transfer yet was it because they were getting everybody back. And he's like, oh, that's tricky. And what he said was that two things. One, they really seem to like Sean Washington, their junior college transfer, who spent a year at Georgia, then went to East Mississippi Community College.
New Orleans native.
Exactly. He is somebody who they said was kind of their mold. He was like, anybody else was going to have to basically match or be better than him in their eyes. And nobody seems to have fit that yet, or at least nobody who they could have landed seems to have fit that yet. And so and Brian Kelly said, quote, "We feel good about retention," end quote. And we don't know exactly who that entails. They have lost 3 backup defensive tackles, but the guys the frontline guys who you really kind of think about and who's going to be on the field next year, Mason Smith, Wingo, and Jacoby and Guillory, we'll see which ones come back. If LSU feels good about retention, it thinks at least then it has to think at least some of them are coming back. Right. And so we'll see how that pans out. Because if LSU ends up in a situation where, say, just for hypothetical sake, Mekhi goes, okay, we'll see. But if you got Sean Washington, Mason Smith, Jacoby and Guillory, and I'm forgetting one all of a sudden. Aren't I?
Lee?
No. Those would be your 3, I guess, and that would be kind of your front 3, and you would need someone to come on like a Jalen Lee. So that would be kind of what you're looking at. But if they can get everybody back, then really you're just sort of swapping out Jordan Jefferson for Sean Washington. So we'll kind of see how that defensive tackle position pans out, because it's something that where LSU needs retention there, because it does not have a whole lot of depth.
And so, sort of in conclusion, you have a lot of players. Suddenly, you have a lot of players who are coming back who had a lot of experience on the LSU defense. Maybe not, certainly didn't the production level or the the results did not speak to a defense that was, particularly good. But you're talking about a whole group of players that are now, presumably a year better, a year more experienced at the very least.
That's what you have to hope if you're LSU, right? That if you get most of these guys back that you're talking about on the defensive line.
And deeper, too.
Yeah, and deeper. And Greg Penn comes back, and Harold Perkins is coming back, and you hopefully are more stable in the secondary, keeping Sage Ryan. They have to be somewhat better, right? I mean, because as we've talked about, you can't expect this offense to be number one in the country. Wilson's
struggling a little bit.
No, they have to be somewhat better. Yeah, at least mediocre, middle of the road, because this offense won't. You can't expect them to be quite as prolific as
they're not going to be. It's not possible.
The optimistic view in this regard would be, remember, Brian Kelly said just a couple weeks ago that they were basically counting on 10 of the 11 defensive players with the most snaps of coming back. And we think he meant 10 of the 11 who are eligible to come back. And we don't know who that one person would be.
Right.
But so if you're kind of running it back on defense with a lot of the same guys, plus Jordan Gilbert, we'll see who else, if anybody they bring in out of the transfer portal, then you're really counting on this group developing a lot and getting better and being put in a better position to make plays as well. And so we'll kind of see, how that pans out. But that seems to be, at the moment, kind of what that defense is going to look like next year. Is a lot of the same guys, but they need to be developed and they need to be put in a good position to make plays.
Any other, as we sort of wrap up, you guys have obviously seen a little bit of bowl practice to this point. Anything that stands out as as we're getting down here to the home stretch, Tigers versus Badgers on New Year's Day? Anything else that stands out of practice? Anything on Nuss?
Yeah, I was going to say Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, we saw him being the first-team quarterback this week. Obviously, he's been in that position now ever since bowl practice started last Monday, really. And, it's going to be fascinating to see how the offense looks different with Garrett at quarterback, because Brian Kelly even, hinted at some schematic differences that they'll be made, because everybody knows, I mean, him and Jaden, their styles they're different. Mm-hmm. We were talking to Emory Jones today a little bit, and he said that, as an offensive lineman, it's going to be different than having played with Jaden, because Nuss is looking to maybe wait just a half second longer to maybe air it out.
Right. Make more plays through the air, he said,
but
than obviously on the
ground.
ground.
And then that's something Brian Kelly mentioned too. I mean, was that they're going to be airing it out a little bit. Nuss wants to throw it deep, and they know as offensive linemen they might have to hold up a little bit longer in pass pro, because you also don't have a guy who is making his reads, who got so fast at making his reads this year and then could take off when he wanted to. And Nuss can run a little bit, but not to the same extent, of course. And so I think also fascinated just to see how the run scheme is different, if at all, because LSU did so much on inside zones, building off of zone read handoffs and RPOs, and if you don't have the same kind of runner at quarterback, could we see some different schematic stuff in the run game? I'll be fascinated to see if that happens on New Year's Day.
Wilson was talking to one of the other players, and I kind of leaked over into the TV cameras were talking to Garrett Nussmeier, and I was very, he said to you guys, but I was struck by some of the things he said. He sounded obviously very eager to get his first career start, but he sounded very ready to lead the offense. He's like, our styles are different. He said Jaden and I are different people. And he said there are different ways to lead, but he sounds like he's really ready to take over, and obviously is really glad about this opportunity to start this game in the bowl game instead of waiting until September till the USC game to get that started. And as I wrote already when Jaden made his announcement, I think this it would have been nice to see Jaden, but it really benefits LSU, and it certainly benefits Garrett Nussmeier. So we're going to see what he can do with it. But he struck me as confident. He struck me as someone he's waited. Again, as I've mentioned before, kind of reminded me of Matt Flynn. Back in the day, back in 2007, when he had to wait for Jamarcus Russell to leave, and we all know what LSU did under Matt Flynn in 2007. They won the national championship. Not saying that that's the expectation next year, but I was struck by how prepared he seemed to be, and it's going to be fascinating to watch him play.
Well, one last thing I do want to add in closing about the quarterback position. I know we brought this up probably a month or so ago. Like, will they go after another quarterback in the transfer portal? I was very skeptical that they would. Skeptical in the sense that I did not suspect that they would sign somebody who would present as a true challenger to Nussmeier, because they've invested so much in him and he's waited his turn or that. It seems, though, now, having signed A.J. Swan, having brought in Colin Hurley, and now, of course, they're hot after Bryce Underwood, that they really sort of have the you've got the quarterback position, at least next year, about as good as you can want in terms of a group. You've got somebody who you think is going to be the starter, who's waited his turn, is going to be a veteran. You've got now somebody who you think can be a dependable backup, somebody who started 12 times at an Vanderbilt, I understand, but at an SEC school, somebody who's not you're not throwing Ricky Collins out there sort of to the wolves maybe before he's ready, and then of course you have Hurley coming down the line. So a much better, more well-rounded quarterback group than you had maybe going into this year, thinking you were going to go into next year.
Oh, you mean going into next year? I was going to say, going into this year, you had the best quarterback room in the country with the Heisman winner, and then Garrett, being behind him. Have we? I guess when did they? I'm getting my timelines mixed up. There's been kind of a busy week. I don't know if we've talked about AJ on the podcast yet necessarily. This is somebody who looked like he was headed to South Carolina. Yeah. LSU was able to convince him otherwise because he'd visited both schools, and he ends up committing to LSU, and it sort of. LSU had to kind of thread a needle, getting a quarterback because it has a lot of confidence in Garrett Nussmeier, and it wasn't going to go after somebody who, unless it, probably wasn't going to go after some of those top names. So it had to find somebody who was willing to come in and compete, but also with the understanding that they might be a backup. Right. And, AJ is going to be able to try to develop a little bit more. He was injured a lot this year. He had a elbow contusion that he suffered early in the year. A week right after he suffered the injury, threw 3 interceptions against Kentucky, and then he just didn't really play again until the regular season finale. He's someone who is going to probably need to develop a little bit, and Joe Sloan has shown an ability to do that with quarterbacks. That might have been something that was attractive to AJ because he's got a completion percentage that's in the 50s over his career, and you can't be a starting quarterback in the SEC with that you got to be able to be hitting on more of your throws. And so not that Garrett's is like incredibly high yet either, but AJ has a little bit of a larger sample size, and so we'll see how it pans out and what it looks like in once AJ gets to campus, because he's not here yet or anything like that, but how much is he really going to be able to push Garrett? We'll see, because I think he's going to have to be able to get a little bit better in order to do so. But the other thing, just to add about it, because I asked Garrett, it was that Garrett did know that LSU was looking at quarterbacks. This wasn't something that caught him off guard. They were pretty transparent with him about it, and he said he's looking forward to competing with AJ.
Interesting decision by A.J. Swan, because you would think with Spencer Rattler leaving South Carolina, he'd have a better shot to be the starter there, and he made the decision to come here. But maybe, as you said, for the developmental aspect of it, he thought that this would be the best situation for him.
We will see about A.J. Swan, but that will have to wait until next season. For now, we are going to focus all our efforts from here until New Year's Day on the season finale, the 2023 season finale. These two gentlemen will be in Tampa the next time we reconvene for this fine podcast.
We'll have a water background behind us or something.
Yes, you're going to patch in via the front porch of Columbia Restaurant or something like that to make me more miserable than I might already be having to sit back here. No, we will be back a week from today to preview the LSU Bowl game, LSU versus Wisconsin, of course, at 11 a.m. January 1st. On ESPN down in Tampa, Florida. We are brought to you every Monday and Thursday, except for this coming Monday, of course, because of the holiday. We're brought to you every Monday and Thursday by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more, please go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. We are obviously here on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Please subscribe there. Please subscribe to The Advocate if you have not already. Please support your local journalists here, Wilson and Rab. They do a fine job, obviously. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe and get a hold of our newsletter. It's a free newsletter delivered daily to your inbox. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And one more thing before the holidays are over, please visit the Advocate store. That's store.theadvocate.com to order all your championship posters and your championship gear, and the Heisman posters and the Heisman gear as well. We will be back, obviously, a week from today to preview LSU versus Wisconsin in the Bowl. Until then, for Scott Rabalais, for Wilson Alexander, and for Amelia Cotton behind the glass, we wish you the happiest and merriest of Christmases for all those out there who celebrate. My name's Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.
Shoot your eye out, kid.
Wilson.